Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week, Race B is surprisingly balanced. However, Race C is incredibly unbalanced. It's actually playing to the strengths of the already overpowered meta car. Now, the second car, the anti-meta, if you would, is also a front-wheel drive car, and I don't prefer that. I know a lot of people out there do not prefer it as well, so we have another car, a second anti-meta meta car, and hopefully you'll like that a bit more. Once again, the TT is dominating the leaderboard with 85 of the top 100 times set by the TT. The RCZ is, of course, clearly almost as quick, but it's nowhere near as prolific on the board. Takari actually got the NSX to 17th place, and that is our rear-wheel drive option of the week. I got the RCZ to 34th place. We're going to unfortunately have to jump all the way to the 200s to see where I would have placed the NSX had I not placed an RCZ time. The RCZ is our first anti-meta meta car. It is just like the TT, just unfortunately slightly worse in every way. However, I'm very happy to say that the NSX, which has recently received a buff, is our rear-wheel drive pick of the week. You can almost contend. Once again, I've uploaded my qualifying lap replays because I know not everyone uses the same view I do, so you can download it and watch it with whatever view you usually use. I've used the tags anti-meta, AMMC, and TyrannoCyrusRex. Now, before we go on, I want to talk about the specific replays that I uploaded. I uploaded 2 for the RCZ. Initially, I set a pretty good time with the RCZ, just driving it like normal. And then I remembered that a lot of the very, very, very fast times were set with some left-footed braking. A lot of people are calling it brake dragging. It goes by a few different names, but essentially what they're doing is they're keeping weight over the front tires while also accelerating. Front-wheel drive cars suffer from a lot of understeer in various situations because so much is happening with the front tires. And when you get on the throttle, naturally the weight shifts backwards. Well, if that happens, then it's going to take weight off of the front tires and it's going to take grip away from the front tires. So by using the brake dragging, also known as the left-footed braking, overlaying the brake and the throttle, you can trick the car into maintaining some weight over the front tires and still being able to accelerate out of corners. So the second replay that I uploaded is going to feature that. And I did end up going a lot faster when I did that too. And the third lap that I uploaded is just the basic qualifying lap in the NSX. You can definitely go a lot faster. Takari set an incredibly fast time, but I'm going to go over my lap, of course. And so then you'll be able to go along with me. Starting off way on the right, we can look for these meter boards that are hanging down over the track. Those are great, but they're just going to signal for us to look at the end of the fence. Right before the end of the fence is when we're going to brake. We're going to brake very hard, we're going to brake in a straight line, and at the end of the green wall is when we're going to start turning in. We want to trail brake, and you can use this curb if you want to. If you go too deep on it though, you're going to bounce and that's going to upset your car. We don't want to go all the way to the right because we need some space to turn in so we can get on the throttle early. Like always, we want to be very gentle, and whatever you do, avoid that grass. In order to use as much of the track as we can, we want to put 2 tires over that white line. 4 tires over will give you dirty tires. 2 tires on the curb here. If you go over too much, it's going to make your car bounce, and then we're going to look for these tire marks right here. That's my signal to brake, downshift, and immediately trail brake into the next corner. For road cars with softer suspension, you can actually use all of the gray cement. However, for race cars, you want to stay just on the candy cane colored curbing. If you go way out here, that's actually totally fine as long as 2 tires are still on the red and white curbing. In my opinion, the next corner is the most difficult corner on the track. When you're starting to brake, the corner has already started to curve, and so it's really easy to accidentally brake and slide directly off the track. So I always like to angle myself a little bit in before starting to brake. This cement bar on the side, right when that ends, right when I get past it, is when I'm going to start braking. You'll notice I angle my car, brake, and pretty much immediately trail brake to make sure I don't just go straight off the track. You want to make sure you carry as much momentum as you possibly can. However, if you carry too much, you're going to miss your apex, like I did, or you're going to go off here, like I almost did. I'd probably go faster if I had slowed down more or just turned in earlier so I could go straight up the hill. Another very tricky section of the track, I don't have a specific brake point, just when my front and rear right side tire are all the way on the curb, that's when I start braking. Don't allow your tires to go beyond the curb. It'll get you stuck between the wall and the curb, and the best case scenario, you'll still miss your turn in. Worst case scenario, you're going to be drug off beyond the turn. When you do turn in, you want your right tires to just barely be on the red and the white. Use as much of the off-track section as you possibly can. You want to almost straight line this section as much as you can. When you hit this curb, you want to attack it again and use almost a straight line and then turn in early to try to do the same thing here. If your tires get stuck on the outer edges of the curbs, it's going to set your car off in a really weird angle. So make sure you're going over the red and white curbs, not barely on the outside. The next corner is affectionately known as the Big Banky Boy. It's probably the most famous corner on the track, and it's very tough. Just like, honestly, every other corner. It's just a tough track. But anyways, we're not going to look for the meter boards. We're going to look for the end of the green wall, just like before, and we're going to brake when our car gets entirely past it. Now, we're going to try to use just the outside tires on the red and white curbing. Some cars can use the entirety of the cement portion. You can just use it almost like the carousel, but this car, not so much. It can upset the balance, and if you go off here, if you get on the throttle too early or too quickly, then you're going to lose a lot of time and probably multiple positions if you're in a race. You don't need to go all the way to the outside there or here. You really just want to take a middle line, making sure you get enough space to turn in and not go off here. The next corner is another very difficult one because it doesn't have a very specific brake point, or at least not one that I could find. It's about 2 car lengths before the 50 meter board. I like to try to turn in either right before or right at the 50 meter board. Here I didn't quite turn in as early as I should have, so I didn't use as much of the infield as I could have. There's a lot of grip on the inside, so you can put the outside tires on the red and white curb. From here we want to get on the throttle again and try to track out as much as we can without going over the outside portion of the curb right here. It'll bounce you and make you go completely off the track sometimes. Once again, we want our outside tires on the curbing. If you hit at a shallow angle and use more curb than that, then it can make you bounce. Here, you want to avoid that sausage curb. If you're lucky, you can hit it and you'll be fine, but if you hit it just right, it can bounce you enough to throw you entirely off the track. Using the black sign on the right, we actually want to brake with enough time to turn in at that point. I made the mistake of braking then. You'll see that I put my left tires on the curb, and that's actually where my right tires should be. You can use so much of the curbing here, and if you can use that much curbing, you can get on the throttle that much earlier. You don't want to go all the way off here because, of course, you're going to get dirty tires, and the runoff area is super dangerous because the wall then closes in. So if you do go off, you'll crash. That's our lap. So we're going to treat this video as our flying lap, but we're going to slow it down just at the very beginning so you can kind of see how I was playing around with the brake drag. The concept boils down to keeping your foot on the brake just a little bit anytime you're going to get on the throttle in order to keep some weight over the front tires so the front has better grip. Like we discussed in the last lap, when you get on the throttle, the weight shifts backwards, and if the weight shifts backwards, it's going to take grip away from what you're using to steer as well as accelerate with the front wheels on a front-wheel drive car. We ended up going about 3/10 faster, and I believe all of that improvement comes down to messing around with the brake drag, not just better lines. Coming up on this really tricky corner we talked about before, you'll notice that after braking, I'm going to stay on the brakes just a little bit, get on the throttle a lot, and kind of trail brake after I've gotten on the throttle. As we come up here, you're going to see me to use the same technique so I can just get on the throttle earlier and still try to go straight through the curves rather than just circling around them or kind of just on the edge. Straight through each one as much as possible. I will take this time to say that I do not have very much experience with using the left foot overlay on the brake when it comes to race cars. I do it a lot for the street cars, and I had a lot of success in the Nations race with it, but this was actually the first time I'd played around with it, so it's pretty powerful. I actually lost about 1/10 or 2/10 here compared to another lap that I had done, but I think you can see that I get on the throttle a lot quicker than on the last lap. It's a lot easier to see on the very second corner, but I think you should probably be able to see on each of these corners that the car rotates just a little bit as I'm still on the brakes and I'm touching the throttle. You may recall from the last lap when I actually broke it down talking about how I didn't use the curb nearly enough, and that's just because the car was understeering more than I expected. And on this final corner, I braked too late previously. I braked too late again, but using just a tiny bit of the brake drag as I got on the throttle, I was able to correct my line, so it can be a very, very powerful tool. With that said, no brake drag necessary for the next one. The only real differences on the NSX lap are the gears used, so we're just going to go through it quickly. I did go over this curve but didn't upset the car too much, so I can get on the throttle quickly. Here I did dip to first, back up to second so we can rotate and then get back on the throttle. This next couple of corners is pretty much exactly the same. We put 2 tires over the white, 2 tires on the curb, and here we dip down to second for rotation, then back up to third before we get on the throttle. You're probably going to start noticing the pattern that it's all pretty much the same, but I've dipped down to second or first a lot in order to make sure the car can rotate. Again, we stay away from the very edge when we're braking, and we're trying to get on the throttle as early as we can while keeping up a lot of momentum for that corner. I use the exact same braking reference point as I did in the last lap, but this time I went a little bit nicer over the first curb. Unfortunately, even though I hit the first and second one nicer, as you can see I go straight through, kind of missed this one. Luckily it didn't grab the tire and make it go too wide. You want to rev it to 127. 128 if you're feeling brave, but it will hard cut the revs and you'll lose a lot of momentum if you do hit the rev limiter. You'll notice I brake in the exact same place preparing for Big Banky Boy. I put 2 tires on the red and white, and I had to really carefully time the throttle because if you get on the throttle too early or too sharply, then you're going to get a lot of understeer with this car. Now, I did not realize that you can actually rev a lot more than 101 miles an hour in third gear, so make sure you try to rev it out. I think you can go to 104 miles per hour. I tried pushing the braking too late, and I braked about the time I should have turned in, and you can see that I missed the apex by just a little bit. Only my inside tires were touching that curb. That was much better, that's closer to what you want to do, and we of course avoided the sausage curb there. I turned in a little bit late for this, but downshifting to third allowed me to get a better line. And then of course back up to fourth before we exit. We could definitely find more speed, but all in all not very bad for a non-meta car. Before we go over the races, we're going to talk about fuel saving. Fuel saving is the most important part about race C. Even if you don't have the greatest pace, if you have the best fuel saving, chances are you can pull out a really good result. Now you could use the fuel map, and for some car and track combinations that's a good idea, but the vast majority of the time it's actually the worst, the least efficient way to do it. The best way is by short shifting, and I'm going to show you an example of the big differences between short shifting and fuel mapping coming up. As I'm pulling out of the pits, you'll see that I've switched the fuel map to fuel map 3, which makes it so the fuel to air mixture is a little bit leaner, meaning we're going to use a little bit less fuel. Most people who just click on the fuel map will just drive like normal, and that's exactly what's going to happen if you choose to use the fuel map and you drive on automatic. So this is me pleading with you to learn manual. Not only is it going to be faster because you can choose when to shift, and not every car is actually faster when you rev it out, but also you'll be able to choose how much fuel you use, and it is really the most important thing you can do. Race C generally has tire wear that's pretty heavy, fuel usage that's pretty heavy, a combination of the two, or is just a longer race. And almost all of the GTWS seasons are going to feature at least one fuel saving round, if not the majority of them being fuel saving rounds. We're going to go ahead and speed this up just a little bit. I want you to start taking note of how much fuel we have at certain points. At the end of this sector, we're at 94%. And when we're at Big Banky Boy, we're at 93%. And let's jump to the end of this lap. Now, as you can see, as we cross the finish line, we're left with 88% fuel. Since this is a 10-lap race, it's really easy to calculate how much fuel you need. You need 10% per lap. Now, you usually start the races with 99%, which means that we're really only at a 1% deficit. It kind of evens out as you go on, and your car actually becomes more fuel efficient as it starts weighing less because you're losing fuel. I'd ask you to pay attention to how much fuel we had when we were through the S's and leading to the end of this sector, and it becomes pretty clear once we get up here that we've used more than 10% fuel since the last time we were here on this part of the track, which means that we're definitely not saving enough fuel. Now, in some cases, that means that we could just adjust to a higher fuel map, maybe fuel map 4, or we could potentially use a different fuel map for a different part of the track. Maybe if the track is really twisty at some points, we use a higher fuel map. That can be a good strategy, but most of the time, and especially with a car like this, let's take a look at how much fuel we have at the end of our second lap. It's pretty clear we're using much more than 10% fuel per lap. And take a look at the times, 2:08.7 for that second lap, 2:06.6 for the first. Coming out of the pits, you'll notice that I've left the fuel map alone, but you're going to start to see that I am shifting at approximately 50% of the digital tachometer. The digital tach is your best friend. You can use the analog tach, especially if you have to short shift enough that it doesn't actually appear on the digital tach, but it's a lot easier when you can just use the digital tach to see exactly when you want to shift. I think probably the hardest part about short shifting is figuring out what gears to use. You're going to be in a higher gear on the straights because you're shifting a lot earlier, and that means that you might have to downshift more to get in the correct gear for each corner. I know this can sound daunting at first, but it's honestly the exact same thing as when you learn how to time trial for a specific car and track combination. You have to figure out what gear is optimal, you have to figure out when shifting is optimal, and so it's really just the same thing, and you already have your time trial lap to base it off. I think the most beautiful thing about short shifting is you can choose how little or how much you want to short shift, and you can change it for different parts of the track. I didn't do it quite as much for these example laps because I just wanted to stay consistent so you could really see the main differences between fuel mapping and short shifting. But when you're going downhill, you could choose to shift a little bit earlier because you have gravity on your side. And when you're fighting gravity up a hill, you could choose to rev it out a little bit more, because in most cases, the higher the revs, the more power you're producing. We're going to speed it up here, but since it is a bit different with short shifting, I wanted to show you that it's not that much different. You can really make the decision and adjust as you go on if you need to brake at a different point or turn at a different point. It's all going to be really minor adjustments, and it's going to be based on the different speeds or the different amount of power that you feel that you have. If you see our outlap, that's about 1.5 seconds faster than our outlap when we were using the fuel map. Like I said on the outlap, we're getting to a completely different gear. We're in 6th here instead of 5th. And so the downshifting rhythm is going to be different when entering the corner. The end of this sector is after the S's on the back straight leading to Big Banky Boy. On the second fuel map lap, we had 82%. We now have 84% from short shifting. When you're short shifting, not only are you saving, at least in this case, enough fuel that you could go a complete extra lap, you're also going about 1.5 seconds faster than you could have if you used the fuel map. There are some rare occasions where just choosing a different fuel map for a certain combination of car and track is a better idea, but the best time to use the fuel map is when you're in someone else's draft. You don't have to worry about the air resistance, so you can just tick it up to a different fuel map and then save fuel while going the exact same speed. The other technique is lifting and coasting, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the race. So we've got a really good race where I started in 7th place, and that ended up being the perfect example I needed. We had 6 people in front, and then I believe we had 6 people behind as well, right in the middle. Now, this is actually a really good example of why the fastest strategy can sometimes be dangerous, and I want to show you guys exactly what you should expect if you do set a good qualifying time and then expect to use a no-stop strategy. And before we get too deep into the race, I do want to talk about the fact that some shenanigans happened about 1/4 of the way into the very first lap, and I think it has a lot more to do with inexperience rather than the dirty driving. So rather than trying to name and shame some people who may or may not have actually intended on doing the dirty things, we're going to go ahead and just skip past all of that. But right off the bat, you see that Mustang was already trying to make a move. That guy's definitely going on an all-out strategy. He's just using up all of his fuel. It doesn't appear that he is trying to save whatsoever, and he may or may not be on medium tires as well. This Corvette driver may be on hards, who knows, but I'm already making moves, and as I try to go in, the Mustang pushes straight past. The Porsche behind me, also doing the same thing. Now, again, this may be inexperience, this may be too aggressive, who knows, but with all these people on different strategies, as I try to move here, you can assume what happens going 3 wide into the most dangerous corner. Needless to say, things got pretty wild. I actually ended up all the way down in 10th place, but due to people pitting, as well as just having pretty good pace with the RCZ, I'm all the way back up to 5th place now at the beginning of 4th lap. We are now behind the meta car, and whether or not my pace is because of just my overall pace or because of the differing strategies, that is the meta car in front of us, and I am on the slowest strategy that you can go, with the RCZ. Overall, it's obviously the best, but I'm on hard tires and I'm fuel saving enough to make it the entire race. I had an NSX race that I also did, but I'm not even going to show you guys because it was literally just me staying in the front the entire time, and the strategy is exactly the same. We're just going to short shift the entire way, and I will show you a couple of the techniques that I would use with the NSX that would be the exact same as this if we did end up behind some people. And here comes the first. So I talked a little bit about using the fuel map when we were following behind a car. So I want you to pay attention to the split between us. We're at about a little bit more than 4/10 back, and we are now close enough that I can shift to fuel map 5, and you'll see that we're actually maintaining the exact same gap. I then let off the gas a little bit before braking. That's not a really good example of lift and coast, but you'll see that I didn't lose any time while staying in Bronson's slip. Unfortunately, he just let me pass. I was definitely willing to and hoping that he would want to battle because I wanted to show what this car was capable of while fuel saving, but either way, can't be too mad at someone letting us go. Now we're going to jump forward to the second sector of the 6th lap. I'm about a 10th down, and we're about to go uphill, so I'm going to use a little bit more fuel. I'm going to rev the car out just a little bit more than half since we're going uphill, so we have a little bit more power. We're going to continue revving it out a little bit more than we were throughout this entire sector because it is slightly uphill. And then, of course, on this back straight, we get that really big downhill section, and that's when we're going to use lift and coast. Going downhill is one really good option. Also, when you're going really fast into a really slow corner is another good time. But what I'm going to do is, before the braking zone, I'm going to lift completely off the throttle and just let the car coast for a bit. And I'm going to get on the brakes a little bit later. You can also just get on the brakes at the same time, just gentler. But you do have to take into account the fact that you're going to be going a little bit slower. Now we're going up another hill, so I'm going to use more fuel again. And if you look at our fuel percentage, we are right on track for using enough fuel to make it. And we've actually gained 2/10 on our fast lap since we were a 10th down at the beginning of the last sector. I now want you to pay attention to the time difference between myself and Bullwinkle, who's in the lead. Bullwinkle is 17.5 seconds ahead as of right now, the end of lap 6. Fast forwarding to the end of the 7th lap, we see that the closest opponent is 8 seconds ahead. The furthest opponent is now 18.5 seconds ahead, and our second place driver, Stop Ratting, is now jumping in the pits. Not only was he on the faster tire compound, he also only has 7% fuel. We're at 31%. Even if you were saving fuel, so you didn't have to refuel, and you're just changing the tires, the pit delta is still going to be somewhere around 22 seconds. Thinking back to how we started this race, we started in 7th place. We got caught up in shenanigans. I was down in 10th place, and now on lap 8 of 10, we're now in 3rd place and only 18.5 seconds off of the leader. Now at the end of lap 8, our leader is pitting in. Only 18.5 seconds ahead. I believe the pit delta is 22 seconds, so we should be ahead of him by the time he leaves the pit. That leaves one person who has maintained an 8-second gap between us. End of lap 9. Our new leader is about to enter the pits. You'll see that he's been saving fuel just a little bit more than the rest, but still not saving quite enough fuel to make it for the entirety of the race. I would guess that he just used the fuel map because putting it on fuel map 3 does save you enough fuel that you can do 9 laps without refueling. I still have 12% fuel, which means I was using less than 10% per lap, and I only have 1 lap left. With Bullwinkle now on the same tires as I am, even if he was going full bore, using all the fuel he could, I'm going to be able to use a little bit more fuel, so I'm going to go a little bit faster than I was, and there's no way he's going to be able to recover 7 seconds in the time it takes for me to complete a single lap. Now, I've raced Bullwinkle a lot, and I actually talked to him after this, and it turns out I really lucked out, because this is the first time he didn't do a no-stop. He usually does the same strategy that I was, but he wanted to test out the one-stop. Imagine if I had started in pole, or closer to the front. That would have been a really easy victory over anyone who wasn't doing the same strategy. So when it comes to the non-meta car, luckily it can perform pretty similar to the meta car. And when it comes to the strategy, the no-stop strategy, when you don't have to stop, is almost always superior. Not always, but almost always. And I was really lucky to pull off a win, especially with how this race started. And with all that fuel saving that we did, we still ended up having to burn a ton of fuel at the end, and we still had more than enough. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something today. And if you like what I do, please like, subscribe, comment, all those good things. Share it with everyone you possibly know. And I'll be back next week helping you defeat the meta here at the Anti-Meta Meta Club.